Welcome back, IB Economics students, to this video lecture. Today we're going to be going over GDP calculations and explanations. We're going to be going over the definitions, the formula, as well as five distinctive flaws with GDPs. So gross domestic product has a definition that's quite easy to understand. So GDP measures economic activity that occurs within a country over a specified time period. Okay, so GDP measures economic activity that occurs within a country. That's the first highlighted. Within a specified time period. Now, why within a country? For example, McDonald's. Okay, McDonald's is an international brand based in America. However, income that McDonald's has, for example, in China, is not accounted for within GDP figures of America, seeing as how the economic activities of McDonald's within China, which is overseas, is not within the country that it is originally based in. Therefore, it is not part of the GDP activity. Furthermore, a specified time period is important to specify because in some countries, for example, America, they give quarterly fiscal reports on the GDP figures and the GDP situation. So that's the GDP calculation, definition. Now, under GDP, you have to understand that there are three major methods in order to determine and to come to a conclusion of what the GDP is. There is the expenditure model, there's the income model, and the production model. Now, theoretically, all three of these models should yield the same exact results, which is equal to the GDP number. However, flaws, that of which will be explored later, would often cause the figures to be different. Okay, so there's the expenditure method, the income method, and the production method. So I will recommend students to use the expenditure method in most if not all of the GDP calculations because it's most easiest to understand and easiest to calculate. So the expenditure model is consumption. Okay, this is domestic consumption, households, a normal domestic consumption, plus investments, plus government spending, plus, okay, this is a little bit tricky, exports minus imports. Okay, why do we need to minus imports? Because we're measuring the economic activity within a country, and imports are economic activity coming from other countries. Therefore, it is important for us to extract the imported quantities. Okay, so these four indicators allows economists to be able to see and be able to measure the economic activity, that of which occurs within a country. So the higher the GDP figures, the more economic activity is occurring. And GDP figures, of course, come from increase in consumption, investment, government spending, exports minus imports. Now, this is the most common method, the expenditure method that most people recommend. However, there is also the income method, the production method, as well as the expenditure method. Now, why are these three methods all theoretically equal? Now, with reference to the circular flow diagram, you would see that despite all the money flows going around the different blocks, the total money output or the total cash output is still equal to each other. Therefore, theoretically, expenditure model, income model, and production model should be equal to each other. Hence, gross domestic product is constant within these three methods. But I just recommend you guys to use the expenditure model since it is the most easiest. Now, with all things, there are also flaws with the GDP figures. The first flaw that I want to talk about is the broken window fallacy. Okay, so if the paper asks you to give examples of flaws of GDP, I really recommend the broken window fallacy. What is the broken window fallacy? For example, if a tornado happens in a certain country, after the aftermath of the tornado, the governments have to, local consumption increases because people have to rebuild their houses, people have to fix their yards, people have to replace broken property. Government spending also increases because governments need to use the National Guard, the military to relieve and to actually minimize the damages of the tornado. Okay, so when in times of trouble, economic activity may increase. Okay, in times of natural/man-made disasters, economic activity may increase, that of which is acts as an incorrect reflection of the true economic measures. So that's the first one, the broken window fallacy. The next one I want to talk about is that GDP does not adjust for leisure time. Now, what do I mean by GDP figures does not adjust for leisure time? Now, it is for this. For example, country A's citizens works 80 hours a week, okay? But country B's citizens works only 50 hours a week. However, country A and B have identical GDP figures, okay? So even though country A and B have identical gross domestic product figures, have the same exact amount of economic activity, countries and citizens in country A works a lot more than citizens in country B. Therefore, although the economic activity is the same, the distribution of wealth and the economic activity within these two countries are extremely different. Therefore, this acts as another flaw to the GDP figures. The third flaw, of course, is GDP only accounts for official government figures. Okay, so and governments are usually incentivized to exaggerate. Government figures may not always be trusted. Also, many economic activities are not recorded. Okay, so that's another problem. For example, the black market, for example, in Mexico has a very big black market, and within the black market, GDP figures are not accounted for because they are not part of the official government figures. The fourth one is wealth inequality. Now, what do I mean by wealth inequality? For example, in country A with 2 citizens, we have 50 versus 50. Okay, so wealth distribution is extremely even. However, in another country, we may have 99 versus 1. Okay, so although both economies measures up to 100%, one country is has a lot more inequality compared to the other country, despite the GDP figures being completely identical. Lastly, we have pollution and environmental costs. Okay, so economists looks at intrinsic costs and looks at opportunity costs in addition to just the fiscal costs. Therefore, environmental and pollution costs may also be considered. That is where, okay, this is where the green GDP is proposed, where environmental consequences of GDP or economic activities are also accounted for. Okay, so these are the five major flaws of GDP figures. Here is the GDP formula for the expenditure method. Here are the 2 other methods, the income and production method, and here is the GDP definition. I hope this video is helpful in just going over GDP, the explanations, the definitions, and the flaws. If it is, be sure to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.